What's up, everybody? Today, I'm going to talk to you about why you should never be making your scope of work by room, and you should always be making your scope of work by line item. This is when we're talking about making scopes of work for rehabs or for new builds. And when you learn this concept, this is really going to separate you as an advanced or an experienced rehabber or builder versus a novice or an inexperienced rehabber or builder. I call this a HGTV effect. When they walk into a bathroom with a contractor and they say, "Hey, Mr. Contractor, how much does this bathroom cost?" And they say $10,000. Then they move on to the kitchen. They say, "How much does this kitchen cost?" They say $20,000. And then they go room by room, figuring out the budget for each room. In reality, this is not how contractors think of jobs. This is not how experienced and advanced builders and rehabbers think of jobs. They think of them by item, not by room. Okay, so this all comes down to a very simple concept. And I talk about this all the time when it comes to the scope of work. Your scope of work is the first domino that we set up when we're trying to create a domino effect in our project management process. The domino effect is where we take on every step first that makes every next step either easier or not necessary at all. So your scope of work is that first domino, and that first domino should make every next step easier or not necessary. So what are those next steps? Those next steps are things like budgeting, bidding, and scheduling. And when it comes to your budget, even though HGTV might make you think otherwise, you should be budgeting by item. When it comes to bidding, your contractors are bidding by item. In reality, they're not bidding by room, okay? Same with scheduling. We wouldn't say do the kitchen first and do the bathroom second and then do the bedrooms third. No, we would go item by item through the construction process to finish the job. So it all comes down to that concept, and our scope of work should be making budgeting, bidding, and scheduling easier. And that's what we're going to talk about today. I'm going to give you 4 main reasons why you should never make a scope of work by room. And this is one of those things that when I talk about it, it typically sets off a lot of light bulbs. It's a aha moment for people who typically make their scope of work by room, okay? And you will see how much easier your process will become when you make a scope of work by construction item. All right, so let's go through my 4 main reasons why you should never make a scope of work by room. What we're looking at here are 2 different scopes of work. On the left, you have a scope of work by item, or the way that I recommend you making your scope of work. And on the right, you have a scope of work by room. Now, full disclosure before we go into this, both of these probably lack full detail. Okay, they could be a little bit more detailed, but I didn't fudge one versus the other to make it any different for the purposes of this video. These 2 are perfect reflections of the same scope of work. They just are formatted differently. One is formatted by room, one is formatted by item. Okay, so the first reason why I think a scope of work by room is not efficient and is more difficult to actually work with is because of the length, is because it actually complicates the process. On the left is a full scope of work for a full gut renovation. This is a type of project that I've done many times in my career, and we can fit it all in a page to a page and a half. Okay, like I said, it might need more detail, but it never really gets over a page and a half, even for a project as complex as a full gut renovation. But on the right, you will see that we have a 2.5 page scope of work. And again, it's missing more detail that it could have. All right, so when I see people give me a scope of work by room, it's typically actually a 5 to 10 page document, because I've actually condensed this into a very neat spreadsheet where a lot of people who have scopes of work by room make it even more pages than it has to be. Turns into 5 to 10 pages. Now, what this ends up doing is when you're communicating with contractors, when you're communicating with partners and lenders, it turns into a hunt for the detail. It's like a Where's Waldo. If I'm trying to find out what we're doing with tile on that project, I have to go through each room, figure out what we're doing for tile in that room, and then find the important detail that I'm looking for me to either update or change or even just figure out what's going on. It's a lot more complicated. And my argument here is that it is actually a lot easier to miss detail when you have such a lengthy scope of work versus when you have a more condensed, more simplified scope of work like we have on the left. If I was a contractor, which I have been, and somebody handed me a scope of work by room, which has happened before, it is a lot easier for me to miss detail, and it is a lot more complicated for me to put bids together. And we'll talk about that in a second. So, a main concept for you when you're rehabbing houses is keep it simple. This is already a complicated process. Why would we complicate it any more than we have to? Now, I understand we can't simplify it too much, right? Complicated processes do require a certain amount of detail. But the more complicated we make it than we have to is just going to end up with miscommunication, mistakes, and finger pointing. We don't want to end up in that situation. So keep it as simple as you can. One of the biggest goals in my career as I've been a contractor, flipper, and then builder is simplifying this process as much as I can instead of over detailing and over complicating. Trust me, I understand the desire for detail. I am a very detailed person, but you should be challenging yourself to simplify more than overcomplicate. All right, so reason number 2 why you should be making your scope of work by item is for budgeting purposes. Okay, so now imagine we're making a budget with these 2 scopes of work, right? I say, I need you to make a budget for the scope of work on the left. I need you to make a budget for the scope of work on the right. Well, when it comes to the scope of work on the left, all I'm going to have to do is add a column to the right that says budget or cost or estimate. And then I'm just going to have to read off each line item, read off the scope of work, and then assign a number for that budget. So for example, this top item says demo right here. Okay? It says full gut interior demo, plaster walls, 2,100 square feet, demo 2 chimneys to the ground, throw trash in owner supplied dumpster. So when I'm making the budget here, I can just say, well, I do demo at $2 per square foot typically for a full gut. I demo chimneys at about $500 per chimney. So it's going to be $4,200 for the demo, extra $1,000 for the chimney, $5,200, right? I'm just going to add that there, and then I'm going to work down this scope of work to make my budget on the right. Now, I can't do that over here with the scope of work by room. If I want to do that same process, I'm going to have a lot more line items to go through. Not only that, it's not going to account for economies of scale because the tile contractor is not just doing the backsplash and just doing the bathroom floor and just doing this bathroom floor. See, I already had to go searching for the tile. They're doing all of that at once, which allows the price to come down due to economies of scale. Now, if we made a budget per line item here, we're not going to properly be able to account for those economies of scale. All right. Now, if you didn't want to do it this way and you wanted to make a budget for just tile, you're going to have to take all this information and essentially make a whole new scope of work in itself. So you're going to have to take all the detail from all the different tile line items for all the different rooms, put it into its own scope of work that might look something like what you have over here, and then you're going to have to assign a budget for that so you can account for economies of scale and honestly just make it a lot easier so you don't have to make 5 different budget line items. You can just make 1 different budget line item. And I think what you're seeing through this process is something that I noticed as I became more experienced as a rehabber and builder. I worked with a company early on that had detail per room. And all I would end up doing is taking all the information per room and putting it into a document that looked like this. And over time, eventually I said, why am I not just making the scope of work like this over here so I can make budgets easier? Okay? So that's kind of my learning process of how I figured out how important it is to make a scope of work by item and not by room. So that's the second reason why I think it's so important, is because it's not going to help you with budgeting. And like we talked about in the beginning, our scope of work should be making every other step of the project management process easier. If it's not making anything else easier, then what's it doing? It's really doing nothing. It just looks a little bit more detailed and it's just organized in a different way. All right, reason number 3 that you should be making your scope of work by item is very similar to what we talked about with budgeting. It has to do with bidding. Okay, when we're actually asking contractors to bid the project, would we rather bid a project, or would you think a contractor would rather bid a project with the scope of work on the left or the scope of work on the right? Again, it is very similar to what we talked about with budgeting. He's going to have to take all the tile information from all the rooms, put it into a different sheet or a different document, and then make a bid for a tile. He's going to have to do that for hardwood. He's going to have to do that for cabinets and countertops. So when I was a contractor, I actually got scopes of work by room from time to time, and I hated it. It was so difficult. I didn't like it. And as a matter of fact, one of the last projects that I was requested to bid had a scope of work by room. And just because of that scope of work by room, I walked away from the business. Not just because of it, right? I was moving into flipping and building, but you get the picture, right? I did not want to bid that project because I knew I was going to have to go through their 10-page document to figure out what we're doing for each item to make a budget that looks a lot more like this sheet on the left, this scope of work on the left, right? So we don't have to beat that drum anymore. You get the idea. It's the same thing with budgeting as it is with bidding. A contractor is going to have to take all this information, put it into a different document, again, that probably looks like what we have on the left, to make their bid. And that's going to frustrate contractors. That's going to lead to items that are missed, because how easy is it going to be for me to miss all the tile scope of work in this when it's so long, so complicated? Like I said, you're going on a hunt. It's going to be like a Where's Waldo situation. He's going to be going through, oh, there's tile, oh, there's tile. And if he misses any piece, then his bid is going to be completely wrong. Then it turns into finger pointing, right? And he's not going to like working with you. So that's the third reason why you should not be making your scope of work by room, because it does not help you bid with contractors. Think about this. When I need a tile contractor to bid my project, all I'm going to have to do is send him this document on the left and say, see tile. Or if I want my window contractor to make a bid, I'm going to say, see windows, right? It's going to be very simple for them to see what's going on. Like I said, there might be more detail that we can add to this, but it's not going to overcomplicate the process to where over here they're going on a hunt. Okay, so like I said, third reason why it's going to make bidding a lot more difficult. It's going to make your relationships with contractors a lot more difficult. Now, the fourth and final reason why you should be making your scope of work by item and not by room is because of scheduling. Now, I can make my scope of work on the left following the normal construction schedule. So if you notice over here, I have demo, foundation, framing, doors, windows, and this is all following the normal construction schedule. This is going to make it really easy to track my budget. It's going to be really easy for me to request bids. And then, of course, it's going to be really easy for me to understand what comes first, second, third, and last. Over here, we are not making our schedule by room. Okay? Or let's just say we're not making our schedule by room. So over here, this is not helping us at all. Of course. Right? This is not going to help us understand the process from A to Z. And even though it's one of the smaller items of why it's important to make your scope of work by item, it's still really helpful. I love the fact that I can look at my scope of work here and say, I need to get my demo, foundation, framing, and doors, windows, decks, and porches all on schedule first. Then I can move into phase 2. Then I can move into phase 3. Over here, that's not helping me at all. And again, this first domino in the process should be making every next step easier or not necessary at all. So these are all the reasons why I think you should be making your scope of work by item. And maybe some of this stuff was repetitive. Maybe a lot of this stuff was eye-opening. I certainly hope it was. And if you have any questions or debates on this, I would be happy to see your point of view and understand where you're coming from. But in my experience, we budget by item, we bid by item, and we schedule by item. So a scope of work by room would never help with those things. But a scope of work by item will make all of those easier. And in addition to that, is going to be more condensed, more simplified, which reduces the chances of miscommunication, reduces the chances of mistakes, and makes everything flow a lot easier. So again, if you have any feedback, you have any questions, feel free to comment on this video. I will also put a link to our scope of work template in the description of this video so you can have it. And while you're at it, you can check out our other videos on our scope of work training so you can get a little bit more information and background into how we teach this information. And if you're interested in learning a lot more detailed training on scope of work, on making your scope of work, check out the Rehabbers Playbook. It's a coaching, education, and networking group for rehabbers and builders. We have active builders and rehabbers in there every single day. We're constantly updating our information, constantly growing our training, and we would love to have you. So that's my little pitch. Anyway, comment, like this video. I hope you enjoyed, and I'll see you on the next one.